Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
She said, "I don't believe in love." The cowboy whispered, "Let me teach you." Ever been hurt so bad you stopped believing love was real out here in the West? Folks don't talk much about heartbreak. They just hide it under dust, whiskey, and silence. Grace Miller had sworn she'd never trust again until a quiet cowboy named Jack Carson looked at her like she was worth saving. She said love was a lie. He didn't argue, he just showed her what truth feels like. Because sometimes, the hardest lessons ain't written in books. They're carved into your heart by someone patient enough to wait. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, tell me, do you still believe in love? Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. The sunset draped Dust Creek Saloon in a fiery red, like a burning cloth stretched across the sky. The last light of day slipped through the wooden window panes, mingling with the thin haze of smoke and the slow, gentle strumming of a banjo. The saloon was bustling just enough to feel alive, yet quiet enough to hear the sighs of those whose lives had gone astray. It was a September afternoon in the American West. 1889, a place where weary hearts often sought strong liquor to avoid thinking about tomorrow. Grace Miller sat alone at a table by the window. Her brown hair fell softly over her shoulders, and her gray eyes resembled a sky just before a storm. She held her glass of whiskey with both hands, not to drink, but as if trying to preserve the last warmth left in her life. 3 years ago, her husband had left with a trading caravan, taking with him her wedding ring, her savings, and the last of her faith in love. Since that day, her heart had become like a dead field. There was wind, there was sun, but life had never returned. Across from her sat Jack Carson, isolated yet not lost in the crowd. He carried the look of a man who had lost more than he dared to admit. Sun-kissed skin, a worn leather jacket, eyes as deep as the shadows after countless sleepless nights. He had once had a wife, a gentle woman who was shot dead by bandits while traveling near the southern border. From that day on, Jack chose silence over hatred, living a lonely life like the shadow of a horse across the desert. No one expected these two broken souls to collide just as the sun was about to sink. Grace lifted her glass again, her tired eyes fixed on the table. And then, unexpectedly, she let slip a cold statement that even startled herself. "I don't believe in love." The banjo faltered for a beat. Jack lifted his head. The afternoon light hit half of his face, revealing the strong contours of a life forged through toil. He didn't smile, nor did he show surprise. He simply set down his glass, leaned slightly toward her, and in a voice low and steady, like dry earth cracking beneath a horse's hooves, said, "Then maybe you just met the wrong teacher." The words fell like a silent gunshot, not loud, but enough to shake everything in the saloon. Grace turned toward him, her gray eyes flickering slightly. A thin, fragile spark so faint lit up in her gaze, long dormant. It was as if his words had tapped gently on the door of a heart she thought had been locked forever. Jack continued to look at her, neither forcing nor flirting, simply observing as if he could see the many layers of pain behind her cold facade. The wind outside grew stronger. The curtain billowed, casting a streak of crimson sunset across the two of them. The banjo fell silent. All eyes in Dust Creek Saloon turned toward them as if they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Two hearts that had thought themselves dead suddenly beat once more, not loudly, Not hastily, just enough to signal that fate had quietly opened its door, and it all began with a seemingly casual remark. But the West, as always, had never believed in coincidences. Part 1. The bet evening fell over Dust Creek Saloon like a thick blanket draped over the town. The oil lamps inside flickered, casting golden streaks across the dust-covered faces of those who had lived too long in the wild. Outside, the wind rustled through the old poplars, sounding like an old song the West had never forgotten. Grace Miller sat there, her delicate fingers brushing lightly over the rim of her glass. Jack's earlier words had shifted the air between them, no longer distant, yet not fully familiar. Just a pause that made her heart ache in a strange, unfamiliar way. Jack Carson watched her for a long moment. His gaze was steady but not heavy, gentle as if he were accustomed to the loneliness of others, because it mirrored his own. He stood, set a few coins on the table, and leaned down close enough for her to catch the scent of horsehide lingering on his coat. "Let's go?" His voice was even and low, like the distant thud of galloping hooves. Grace looked up, slightly confused. "Go," where Jack draped an extra scarf around his neck, fingers brushing the edge of his hat. "Out to the field. We'll ride." Grace raised an eyebrow, almost laughing at the absurdity. "I don't ride with strangers." Jack tilted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes calm and steady like a nighttime lake. "Then let's change that. I'm Jack. You're Grace. Now, we're not strangers anymore." She opened her mouth to argue, but he had already turned toward the door. Cold wind poured in with each of his steps. He stopped at the threshold, not looking back, simply saying, "If you win, I'll stop talking. If I win, you'll have to smile once." Grace froze. A strange, foolish challenge, yet enough to make her heart flutter like a plucked string. No one had challenged her to smile in years, because everyone knew she couldn't. Still, she followed him out the door, not fully understanding why. Outside, the night blanketed the Dust Creek fields. Silver moonlight spread across the dry grass, swaying in the wind. 2 horses tied in front of the saloon whinnied softly as they saw their riders approaching. Jack approached first, running a hand gently along the neck of the black horse before turning to Grace. "Which one will you take?" Grace reached out to the mane of the pale brown horse. It nudged her hand as if recognizing a familiar sorrow. She couldn't resist the warm feeling that suddenly coursed through her. Jack observed, nodding slightly. "It likes you." "That's good." They mounted their horses, and within a few heartbeats, they were galloping across the open land behind the town. The wind slapped their faces, carrying the scent of dust, dry grass, and night. Grace couldn't remember the last time she had ridden a horse, but that feeling of freedom, long thought dead within her, had suddenly come alive. Jack rode beside her, broad shoulders, straight posture, as if born on horseback. He didn't speak, didn't tease, didn't stare too long. He simply matched her pace, enough to make her feel safe. When they stopped in the middle of the field, the moon was high, and the wind carried the distant calls of night owls. Jack turned to her, voice hoarse and gentle. "Grace Miller, you've lost." She blinked, lost what he pointed to her face. That smile. "Don't you see it?" Grace brought her hand to her lips. Indeed. It was curving slightly, a tiny curve, so slight that a stronger gust might have blown it away. Yet it was a real smile, the first true smile in years, since she thought her heart had turned to stone. She turned away, trying to hide the stirrings in her eyes. "I'm not smiling." Jack chuckled softly, a low, gentle, strangely reassuring sound. "Your first little lie of the evening." Grace let out a short, fragile laugh, very small, very delicate, yet enough for Jack to look up at her as if witnessing something rare amidst this dusty, wounded land. That laugh, brief as it was echoed through the quiet night, mingling with the wind, the moonlight, and the vast expanse of the west. And in that moment, they both understood something had begun, small but real, and neither of them wanted to extinguish it. Part 2. The ride under the moon. The field stretched before them like a silver sea reaching to the horizon. The full moon hung high, casting a soft, cool light over every blade of grass, turning Dust Creek at night into another world peaceful. Breathing slowly, free from the scars of the day, Grace and Jack rode side by side, neither leading the other. The rhythm of their horses' hooves rang out and faded into the wind. Gone were the clinking of glasses, the arguments of patrons, the strumming of the banjo. Only the soft earth beneath the horses' hooves and the warm breaths of their loyal animals remained. They didn't speak a word. Grace glanced at Jack a few times, expecting him to look at her the way so many men had before, with desire, with ownership, not understanding. But Jack was different. He looked straight ahead, shoulders relaxed, hands steady on the reins, eyes free of greed or intention. That gaze unsettled her. For the first time in years, she felt a man beside her who wanted nothing from her, no touch, no possession, no exploitation of her pain to fill a void in himself. Jack rode alongside her as if ensuring she wasn't alone, not to bind her. It was a rare kind of respect, simple yet enough to crack the defenses around Grace's heart ever so slightly. The night wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of fresh grass. She could feel her heartbeat steady, lighter than it had been in years. Jack remained silent, but the silence was not empty. It was warm, like a quiet reassurance without words. When they stopped on a high hill, the moon directly overhead shone so brightly they could see their breaths mingle with the night air. Jack turned his head slightly toward her. No smile, only a quiet, deep gaze that made Grace feel as if he could see every shattered piece of her. Then he spoke, softly, as if afraid to disturb the calm of the night. "You don't gotta believe in love. Just believe I won't hurt you." Grace held her breath. It wasn't a sweet promise. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was simply a truth he chose to speak from someone who had been hurt enough to understand. Moonlight fell across her face, and Grace's gray eyes glimmered with something softer than dew, calmer than the wind. A feeling she thought had long been frozen within her suddenly warmed. In that silver field under the moon, amidst the stillness of the western night, Grace's heart, for the first time in years, was no longer afraid. Part 3. The Old Church. The rain came suddenly, as unpredictable as everything in the Wild West. One moment, the sky was wide and calm, moonlight spilling over the fields like a silver veil. The next, wind rose, carrying a chill, and heavy raindrops began to pelt the dry earth like falling bullets. Grace pulled her cloak tightly around her and guided her horse toward the direction Jack indicated. He said nothing, merely leaning low over his black horse, urging it faster through the tall grass. Lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating everything for a fleeting instant, and in that light, she saw a small, dilapidated house perched precariously at the end of the slope, an abandoned church. The wooden door hung by a single hinge, banging against the frame whenever the wind blew. The cross-shaped window above was half shattered, glass long gone, leaving only sharp shards to cling to the remnants of time. Inside, at least it was dry. Jack stopped his horse at the porch. He jumped down first, tying the reins to a rotted post, then turned to steady Grace. She didn't need his help, but his outstretched hand was so steady that she couldn't refuse. Calloused, warm, and safe. She placed her hand in his, and in that brief contact, her heart skipped a beat. Inside the church, the scent of damp wood and long-settled dust mingled in the air. Moonlight streamed through the broken window panes, casting uneven patterns across the long, worn pews, while the altar still bore faint traces of ceremonies long vanished. Jack brushed off a corner of a pew and motioned for her to sit. The rain intensified, hammering on the old wooden roof like distant drums, making the small room tremble with each strike. Grace tucked her legs up to stay warm. Jack sat a few paces away, leaning against the stone altar, eyes tracing the falling rain. A long silence enveloped them, but it wasn't the silence of distance. It was the silence of two weary souls breathing together in unison. Finally, Grace broke the quiet. "Jack." Her voice was so soft the rain nearly swallowed it. He turned his head, eyes softening, waiting for her to continue. "Why? Do you still believe in love?" The question surprised even her. Why did she need to know? Why did her heart crave the answer so badly? Jack looked down at his hands, spinning the worn silver ring on his thumb, one he always carried but seldom revealed. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice low but gentle, as if recounting a story by a campfire. "The day my wife died, I thought everything inside me died with her." Grace froze. He continued, each word like wind and rain rolling over stone. "They shot her while we were on our way home, just to take the wagon. I held her through the night, by the dirt road, under the cold sky, with nothing left to lose." He paused. The rain outside seemed to fall more slowly. "I thought about revenge. Thought I'd become a man with nothing but hate, like so many men in the West." Jack pressed his lips together, then shook his head slightly. But before she left, she held my hand and said just one thing. Grace leaned forward, breathless, not blinking. "Jack, you have to live, and live rightly." A cold breeze swept through the broken window, lifting Grace's hair lightly. Moonlight fell across Jack's face, revealing the lines of experience and the pain still present, though no longer screaming, just quietly, like someone who had learned to carry it. She believed in love. She believed in me. And that love, it never died inside me. Grace. No matter how much I wanted to bury it, the church seemed to freeze in time. Grace looked at him for a long moment. For the first time, she didn't see his wounds. She saw how he lived with them. Silent, patient, without resentment, and above all, still capable of gentleness toward the world. How could she ever fear a man like that? She stood and approached him. She asked no more questions, sought no explanations. She let her heart guide her for the first time in years. Jack stayed seated, but his gaze followed her every step. When she stopped in front of him, she bent slightly. His eyes lifted, close enough that she could see traces of western sunlight still lingering there, Without a word, Grace reached out. Her fingers trembled not from cold, but because her heart was learning to feel again. She gently touched Jack's left wrist. There, a long, faint but deep scar, a mark from a night he had imprisoned himself between pain and survival. Jack flinched lightly, but did not withdraw his hand. Grace traced the scar with her fingertip, as if asking permission to enter a part of his memory that no one had ever touched. She spoke, her voice a low prayer falling to the wooden floor. No one can hold on to someone who is gone, but you held on to the best part of her. Jack closed his eyes for a single second, just one long enough to feel his heart soften once more. Outside, the rain continued to fall. In the abandoned church, moonlight touched their hands, two people once broken, finding a way to live again. Not through kisses, not through promises, but through a gentle touch, in the very place it hurt the most. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change the whole world. Part 4. The lesson. The dawn touched the Dust Creek fields like a warm hand resting on a sleeping shoulder. The early light spread a soft golden layer across the ground, mingling with dew still clinging to the leaves, sparkling like thousands of tiny gems. The morning breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of damp earth, trampled grass, and the promise of a new day. Grace stepped out of the abandoned church with Jack, where they had taken shelter from the rain the night before. Her coat was still a little cold, her hair still carried the scent of old wood, but her heart felt warmer than any morning she had experienced in years. Jack led her farther, to a tall, grassy clearing where the sun could illuminate everything clearly. He stopped and removed the Colt from its worn leather holster, placing it gently into her hands. Grace flinched when the gun touched her skin. I'm not sure I can do this, she whispered. Jack studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something, then stepped closer. Try. I'm right here. His words made her breath hitch. Grace lifted the gun, but her arms trembled violently. From childhood to now, she had always avoided violence, avoided the sound of guns, avoided anything that reminded her the world could be crueler than she could endure. Her hands shook so much that the barrel pointed toward the sky. Jack stepped quietly behind her. Let me. He placed his calloused hands over hers light, but firm. In that instant, Grace's whole body tensed like a drawn bow. The scent of leather from his coat lingered in the air. The faint smell of old gunpowder clung to every seam, and the warmth from his chest radiated through the thin fabric, down her back. Her heart pounded so hard she feared he might hear it. Relax your shoulders, Jack murmured, his breath brushing her hair. Grace inhaled deeply, but his presence was so close. The smell of him, the scent of earth, the warmth of a man who had faced death many times and yet remained calm. For a moment, it felt as if the world had shrunk to just them and the soft morning light. Jack lifted her hands slightly, adjusting the gun toward the wooden target a few dozen steps away. Good. Now, hold your breath. Grace squinted, but the gun still wavered. Jack, I'm scared. That's okay. He leaned closer, his voice low and steady, as solid as the land he was born on. I've got you. No one's going to hurt you, whether it was his words or the warmth he transmitted through his hands. Grace's trembling slowed, not gone completely, but enough for her to stand steady. Now, Jack said, look straight at the bullseye. Believe in your shot. Grace inhaled once more. The sunlight reflected off the gun, casting a soft glow across her face. The morning wind seemed to pause, waiting for this moment. Then bang. Nearby sparrows scattered. The sound of the gun faded into the distance. Grace exhaled sharply, lowering her hands. I missed, didn't I? Jack didn't answer. He simply walked toward the target. Grace followed, heart heavy, not understanding why she so desperately wanted to do well, to prove herself, to impress a man she had known less than 2 days. When they reached the target, Jack stopped. A bullet had lodged perfectly in the center of the bullseye. Dead center, as if it had always belonged there. Grace froze. No way. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, forcing her to look at the result. You did it. She turned to him, gray eyes wide. But I was shaking the whole time. I wasn't sure at all. Jack brushed lightly against her wrist, where her pulse still raced. But you didn't give up. Then he smiled, a rare, slow, warm smile, like the first rays of sunlight. See, you can hit something when you stop doubting yourself. Those words weren't just about the shot. They were about her life, about everything she had lost, feared, and doubted in herself. Grace looked at the target, then at her hands, then at him. In her chest, a small flame had been kindled, not fierce, not consuming, just enough to warm her, to make her want to live again. And in that early light, across the dew-covered field, she realized Jack Carson wasn't just teaching her to shoot. He was teaching her to believe in herself and perhaps in something bigger, something she had thought was dead long ago. Part 5. The ghosts of the past night fell over Dust Creek faster than any other evening, as if the sky itself wanted to warn of something. The saloon lights glowed warmly, the raucous laughter of cowboys mixing with the clinking of glasses. Yet in the air, there was an uneasy tension that Grace couldn't name. She and Jack had just returned to town after their first shooting practice. Dust from the range still clung to his coat, and her hands remembered the way he had guided and steadied her, the quiet trust he had given. Part of her felt light, like walking through fields of wildflowers, yet another part remained a heart hardened by past wounds, ever vigilant, fearing happiness might vanish at any moment. As they entered the saloon, familiar eyes from the townsfolk followed them. No one spoke, but the silence alone made Grace tilt her head, sensing something was different. Jack noticed immediately, stepping closer to her, as if just half a step could shield the entire world for her. Grace chose a corner table. Jack went to the bar to order a drink. Everything seemed normal until the saloon door burst open. A man entered. Dust coated his cloak, his hat low over his brow. His steps were heavy, not from fatigue, but from someone who knew he had the right to instill fear wherever he went. Grace didn't need to look closely. In a single glance, she recognized the gait. Her breath caught. The demon from her past had returned. Liam Crow, the bandit who had abandoned her, robbed her of every penny, and plunged her life into ruin 3 years ago. He scanned the saloon with sharp, knife-like eyes until they landed on her. A crooked half-smile spread across his lips, the same smile she once found charming, now cutting through her heart like a blade. "Grace Miller," he drawled, half excited, half threatening. "Seeing you still standing, I'm surprised." Grace stood slowly. She felt every eye in the saloon holding its breath. But she didn't step back. She didn't hide in a corner. She didn't tremble as before. A shadow appeared behind her. Jack. He didn't touch her or shield her immediately. He simply stood behind a single step back, enough to say if she fell, he'd catch her. But if she wanted to stand on her own, he would let her. Grace inhaled deeply, looking straight at the man who had shattered her life. "You don't scare me anymore," she said clearly. Liam squinted, as if those words struck his pride. "You say that because there's a cowboy behind you." He glared at Jack challengingly. "Or because you forgot how weak you once were." Grace smiled lightly. Not timid, not evasive, not pleading. "I was weak because I trusted the wrong person," she said. "But that ends now." Jack watched silently, his deep eyes locking onto Liam's every movement. A few patrons began whispering. The air thickened like dense smoke. Liam took a step forward. "You think you can stand tall just because a cowboy's beside you?" Grace opened her mouth to reply, but she didn't have time. In an instant, Liam drew his gun. The metal snapped against its holster sharply, freezing the room. Grace Jack only had time to call her name. In that same moment, everything happened like a lightning strike. Jack lunged forward. Liam pulled the trigger. A spark flashed. The gunshot made glasses rattle across every table. Grace barely felt the shadow that swooped in front of her. Jack. His body slammed against hers, pulling them both back. She felt a small groan, faint, yet enough to make her heart seize. Liam stumbled toward the door, swearing, then fled as the saloon erupted into chaos. When he disappeared, Grace finally looked down. Jack's coat, torn along one seam, his shoulder streaked with blood. But he stood firm, hand gripping her arm to ensure she hadn't been hurt. "Jack, oh my God. You..." He cut her off, voice hoarse but steady enough to make her want to cry. "I told you, Grace. No one hurts you when I'm here." She placed both hands on his face, trembling too much to speak. And for the first time in years, tears fell, not from fear, but from the realization that someone had chosen to stand in front of her, to take the bullet in her place. Not for gain, not for calculation, but simply because he wanted to protect her. The saloon fell silent. Outside, the Dust Creek night wind blew cold and sharp. Yet amidst it all, Grace recognized something she thought she'd never see again. There was someone willing to take a bullet for her, and that made her heart, once thought dead, beat again in a new way. Part 6. The Confession by the Fire. Jack's cabin stood apart from the town, nestled against a row of old pine trees. That night, the cold wind blew fiercely, carrying the scent of dust and the dry aroma of western wood. The sky was steel dark, and only the fire inside the cabin glowed warm and alive. Grace helped Jack inside, shutting the door before the chill could rush in. Her heart still felt heavy from the gunfire, her hands shaking from nearly losing him. Jack sat down in a wooden chair by the fire, his shoulder stained red, coat torn along a seam, blood seeping into the sleeve. Grace knelt before him, touching the wound gently. "Jack, my God, you got shot and you're still standing." He smiled lightly, as if it was nothing worth mentioning. "Just grazed the shoulder. I've been through worse." His calm voice made her want to cry, not because of the wound, but because of his reckless courage with his own life. She bit her lip, trying to steady her hands as she peeled back the torn coat. "Don't talk. Let me bandage you." Grace fetched the medicine, bandages, and warm water, her hands shaking so badly she spilled some water into her palms. Jack watched her, lips curling into a faint smile, not playful, but the gaze of a man seeing genuine concern directed at him. "You're trembling like I'm about to die," Jack said softly. Grace looked up, gray eyes wet. "What if you had died? Do you think I could handle it?" Jack was silent. For the first time, he had no immediate answer. He just sat quietly, eyes deeper than the firelight. Grace placed the bandage on his shoulder, her breath mingling with the scent of burning wood and leather from his coat. Her hands shook so much Jack had to cover them with his own, ensuring she didn't hurt him. She took a deep breath. "I've never seen anyone throw themselves in front of a bullet for me." Jack tilted his head, voice low like wind through wooden walls. "Grace, out here in the West, people shoot each other over money, land, hatred." His gaze locked with hers, unflinching, unhidden. "I only choose to bleed for something else." Grace paused. For what Jack leaned slightly toward her, letting the firelight reveal the lines of his face, rugged, strong, yet now softened with tenderness. "Now you see why I don't run from love," he whispered, his breath brushing her skin, sending shivers down her spine. "It's the only thing worth bleeding for." Grace froze. Tears fell before she could even process the depth of her emotions. One drop landed on his hand, warm in the cold cabin air. "Jack, you speak as if I love you," Jack murmured gently, cutting in. Grace couldn't answer. He lifted her hand, his large, warm hand covering hers, steadying her trembling. She looked down, noticing the old scars on his fingers, fragments of his past blended with tonight's wound, forming a portrait of resilience and sacrifice. "Grace." Jack said her name for the first time like a prayer. She lifted her gaze. His eyes held what she had thought she would never receive again: truth unvarnished, unpolished, and a trust he would risk everything to protect. Jack touched her cheek, his fingertip brushing the fallen tear. "You've feared enough." She pressed her lips together, feeling her heart pound painfully. "So, what do I do now?" Jack guided her hand to his chest over the steady, strong beat of his heart. "Let me teach you how to believe again." Grace couldn't speak. She only looked at him, long and unwavering. In the small cabin, amid warm firelight and the scent of burning wood, with the wind whispering through the cracks and two shattered souls finding stillness together, she suddenly understood this wasn't a promise from a man trying to fill a void, not the sweet talk of someone seeking to claim another. This was the vow of a man who had loved, lost, bled, and still believed in the most beautiful thing. Grace placed her hand over his, fingers entwined. No, yes, no, me too, not a single word. But her gaze no longer carried fear. And for Jack Carson, that alone was the answer. Part 7. The Healing. That afternoon at Dust Creek was strangely beautiful, not as vibrant as a sunset, not as fierce as a western storm, just a gentle, quiet afternoon that made one want to breathe slowly so as not to disturb the serenity. The wind rustled through the tall grass, carrying the scent of damp earth from the previous night's rain. Thin clouds drifted lazily across the sky, casting soft shadows that made working in the fields easy and restful. Grace followed Jack to the east fence of the ranch, the trail leading to a wide, grassy pasture where Jack's horses usually gathered each evening. Jack leaned against the fence, checking each wooden post, then looked at her. "See that wire? We need to pull it tight, or the horses will tear it apart." Grace smiled a light, genuine smile that made her gray eyes sparkle in the afternoon light. "I've never done this before. What if I break it?" Jack let out a low chuckle. "Grace Miller, if you can break this fence, I'll marry you." She flushed, eyes narrowing playfully. "Jack." He shrugged and continued tightening the wire with strong, steady hands. Grace helped hold the posts in place. They worked together without needing many words, as if they had done this countless times before. The sound of tightened wire, creaking wood, and the wind across the fields blended into a strangely peaceful symphony. When they finished, Jack led her to the stable. 3 horses were grazing. When they saw Jack, they lifted their heads, flicked their manes, and came to greet him. Grace stood beside them, gently stroking the nose of the light brown horse. "You said you could whistle to call them over." "Right," Jack smiled. "Not could, must. In the West, if you don't know how to call your horses, you've lost half your life." She crossed her arms challengingly. "Then teach me." Jack stood in front of her, leaning slightly, eyes twinkling with a rare mischief. "All right, but don't laugh at me." "No promises," Grace replied quickly, making him laugh. Jack lifted 2 fingers to his lips and blew a long, sharp whistle. The sound carried across the pasture, and within seconds, all 3 horses ran toward them. Grace's eyes widened. "Oh my God, it really works." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Now it's your turn." Grace tried to imitate him. A gust of wind escaped, not a whistle, just a stray breath of air. Jack stifled a laugh, shoulders shaking slightly. "Not bad," he said, though it was clearly far from perfect. Grace tapped his hand lightly. "Don't lie." He stepped closer, so close she could feel his breath mixing with the afternoon breeze. "Let me help." Jack placed his fingers over hers, guiding her finger placement, tongue curl, and breath control. Grace felt the warmth of his hands, the scent of horsehide lingering on his jacket, and the faint smell of smoke from the cabin. Her heart raced, no longer in its familiar rhythm. "Try again," he whispered. Grace whistled short, weak, but it was real. Jack watched her, a small, warm smile forming at the corner of his lips. "There, I told you, you could do it." Grace laughed, a true, natural laugh this time, so genuine that the field seemed to shine a little brighter. She had never imagined herself laughing like this, in the open grass, under the wind, beside a man as quiet and steady as Jack Carson. A soft acoustic tune from the saloon drifted on the wind, a distant melody that made the moment feel like silk. Grace turned to him, her gray eyes no longer heavy, but sparkling with life newly returned. "Maybe you're a better teacher than I thought," she said, voice soft as the breeze. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Not a loud laugh, not a joke, just a small, warm smile, and a gentle gaze that made her heart skip a beat. Dust Creek's afternoon was so beautiful that Grace wished she could hold it forever. And in that seemingly simple peace, she realized love may not be distant, may not be magical, may not require grand vows. Perhaps love is simply this working side by side, laughing together, feeling your heart light, as if it had never been broken. It was the moment Grace knew, even if unspoken, that her heart was healing, little by little. And Jack was the reason. Part 8. The letter. Late night fell over the wooden cabin. The window stood slightly ajar, moonlight streaming through the curtain, casting a silver beam across the old wooden table. The silence was so complete that Grace could hear her own heartbeat. The fire in the hearth still glowed, throwing gentle light across the corners of the room, as if trying to hold on to warmth before the long, cold western night. Grace sat at the table, pen gliding across paper, hands trembling but determined. She wrote each word as if trying to pour out all the emotions she had held inside for so long. Finally, the line appeared. "You didn't make me believe in love. You made me believe in myself." She set the pen down, exhaling deeply, her eyes glistening with moisture. Not sadness, but the feeling of letting go of a weight she had carried for years. She carefully folded the letter and placed it on the table, where the firelight made it shimmer like a treasured object. Grace rose and stepped out of the cabin. Each footstep echoed softly across the wooden floor, carrying with it steady breaths and a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She did not look back, letting everything behind her become the past. But Jack was awake. He opened his eyes and saw the letter. He picked it up, reading slowly, word by word. A smile spread across his lips, not a broad grin, but one warm enough to light up the cold night. He said nothing, made no move to call her back. He knew she needed to leave, and that this was her way of proving she had the strength to walk on her own. The scene seemed to slow as Grace stepped into the night. Wind tossed her hair. Her coat billowed lightly with each step. She turned her head once, only once, and saw Jack standing by the door, silent. But his gaze, deep, warm, full of care, spoke all the words that language could not. No kiss was needed, no embrace required. One look was enough for her to understand he believed in her. He respected her, and he would always wait for her to return, but would never force her. Grace smiled lightly, exhaled, and walked into the night, carrying freedom and the renewed trust she had found within herself. She had written the letter, but it was she herself and this very moment that was the greatest gift she had given to herself. The Dust Creek night remained quiet. Moonlight spilled across the fields, yet this time, in the stillness, a new rhythm of life had begun to grow. Part 9. The Return. Dawn spread over Dust Creek after a long, quiet week. Pale golden light spilled across the silver fields, each blade of grass still holding the morning dew like flecks of gold. The air was crisp, the cool mist clinging to hair and skin, carrying the scent of damp earth, fresh grass, and faint smoke from the cabin hearth extinguished the day before. Birds in their nests began to sing softly, and the rhythm of the west awoke gently, yet full of hope. Jack Carson saddled his horse in front of the cabin, lifted his hat, and took a deep breath. A week had passed since Grace left the letter on the table. He had never forgotten that moment. Her eyes, both strong and soft, had followed him in every step, every long night, carried by the wind across Dust Creek. He knew he had to do something, not only because he needed her, but because she deserved happiness, deserved the courage she had learned during their days together. Jack mounted his horse. The black horse stretched, sniffed the morning mist, and then, galloped across the open fields toward the eastern pasture, where he had taught Grace to shoot, ride, and whistle to call the herd. Each hoofbeat fell steadily on the dew-wet ground, creating a rhythm unique to the west. In the distance, beneath an old oak tree, a familiar figure appeared. Grace stood there, still, eyes fixed on him. Her long brown hair swayed gently in the morning breeze, catching the soft sunlight. She wore a light shawl, arms crossed in front of her chest, standing tall yet graceful, unchanged since the first time Jack met her. Jack slowed his horse, stopping a few steps away, studying her. His heart skipped a beat. She was smiling not timidly, not reluctantly, but naturally, shining from within, from a heart that had learned to love herself and trust another. Grace tilted her head, her voice soft in the quiet morning. "Turns out, I missed my lesson." He smiled low, gentle, yet powerful. A smile of someone who had endured, who understood that love was not a game, but an ongoing lesson. Jack dismounted, stepping carefully over the dew-wet grass. Each step deliberate, as if savoring the moment. She stayed in place, watching him. Her heart raced a pulse that told her she was ready to move forward, ready to give the trust she had once closed off. "Lesson." "Huh," Jack murmured, voice warm and deep like the breeze drifting through the leaves. Grace nodded, smiling. This smile was no longer tentative or hiding pain. It was recognition, courage, and the result of a week she had spent learning, facing her wounds, and confronting the fears she had carried. Jack stepped closer. He stopped before her, leaning slightly. Deep brown eyes locked with hers. The moment was so still that the grass, the wind, and the sunlight seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next chapter. He extended his hand slowly, patiently. Grace did not shy away. Their hands met, not forceful, not hurried, just a simple interlacing, carrying trust and understanding. "Good thing class is still open," Jack said, his warm, low smile curling at the corners of his mouth, a hint of mischief tempered with sincerity. Grace smiled softly, eyes bright, a smile not just for him, but for herself, for finding trust, hope, and the feeling of being loved and able to believe again. They stood there, in the vast field under the Dust Creek sunrise, hands still clasped. The wind carried the scent of earth, grass, and dew. Both knew this moment was not just a return, but a new beginning, a lesson they would live and learn together. Grace closed her eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. The smell of the fields, the horses, and the cabin wood lingered in the air. She realized true love doesn't require grand promises, no dramatic gestures. It exists in presence, in gentle touches, in simple smiles. In every moment, people choose to trust each other. Jack lifted his hat, sunlight glinting on his sun-kissed face, eyes still fixed on Grace. He leaned down slightly, a gesture of respect and tenderness, and drew her close. Grace tilted her head, resting her forehead against his shoulder, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. No words were needed, no questions, no explanations, only presence, only the golden morning light over the fields, and the peace they had just reclaimed. The Dust Creek morning was quiet but alive. Birds sang softly. Dew evaporated under the sunlight, and the gentle wind seemed to sweep away old wounds. In that moment, Grace understood true love is not something you search for, but something you learn to feel, give, and trust. Jack pressed her hand gently, whispering, "Class is still open, and we'll learn together." Grace smiled, eyes bright as the morning dew. Then, "I won't skip this lesson." They stood together in the golden fields under the rising sun, for the first time free of fear, doubt, and hesitation. Only trust, warmth, and a slow, gentle love that Grace had once thought impossible, now a living, breathing reality. Part 10. The Kiss Under the Sunset. The sunset draped Dust Creek in fiery gold and red. Fine dust danced in the air, creating shifting layers of light across the ground, the grass, and Grace's hair as it lifted in the breeze. The west seemed to hold its breath, leaving only the soft wind and the steady rhythm of two hearts standing in the vast expanse. Grace stepped closer to Jack, her hand lightly resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath her palm. She sensed the warmth from his body, the solidity, the honesty that words could never fully convey. Her heart, once fearful, doubtful, and frozen, melted in absolute trust. Jack gazed at Grace, his eyes deep, gentle yet decisive, as if he had found everything missing in his life the moment she stepped into it. No words were needed, only their eyes spoke everything. The wind carried the scent of dust, dry grass, and warm earth from the fading day. Grace lifted her face to his, and for a long, suspended moment, she felt completely safe, completely home beside him, in the vast western plains, under the brilliant yet soft light of sunset. They moved closer. The world around them blurred, leaving only the two of them. Jack bent slightly. Grace closed her eyes. When their lips met, the world seemed to pause. The kiss was gentle, slow, and deep, carrying every past pain, every lingering fear, and every hope newly born. It was not merely a kiss of passion, it was a kiss of healing. Two hearts once broken, betrayed, and frozen by loneliness and loss now found each other, finding trust and absolute safety. The red sunset embraced them, turning the surroundings into a dreamscape, as if the West existed solely for this moment, a moment of trust, of love, of renewal, after all the losses. When they pulled apart, Grace's hand remained on Jack's chest, feeling his heartbeat merge with her own. No doubts, no fear, only absolute trust and a quiet, overflowing joy. The wind blew, dust shimmered in the light, and the sunset burned over the fields. Two people stood there in the vast western plains, between light and shadow, breathing, laughing softly, knowing their hearts had found each other and this time would never part. Love that teaches you back. Late afternoon settled over the cabin porch. Soft golden light stretched across the old wooden floor, casting long shadows. The wind carried the scent of earth, dry grass, and lingering pine from the cabin. Dust Creek was so quiet that one could hear the slow breathing of two people sitting together. Grace leaned against Jack's shoulder, smiling softly. Her hand rested on his, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat, the heartbeat that had protected her, taught her to believe in love, and guided her through fear and loss. They sat in silence, listening to the wind rustle through the pine trees. The sun sank, casting its final rays, dyeing the distant fields crimson. The scenery was gentle yet profound, like a message from the west to broken hearts. Grace closed her eyes, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling peace spread through her. No more worry, no more doubt. Only absolute trust, the certainty that she had found where she belonged. Jack placed his hand over hers, squeezing gently. Words were unnecessary. His gaze, his gentle smile, and his presence said it all. Love is not only about seeking, but also about learning, growing, and trusting. And in that wooden porch, as the sunset faded and darkness settled softly, a voice seemed to whisper across the plains in a world full of scars. Sometimes love ain't something you find, it's something you learn. If this story touched your soul, drop a comment. Have you ever stopped believing in love? Don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. This is Wild West US, where broken hearts learn to love again. The cold-hearted cowboy loving through redemption. Love that saves a man from himself. Second chances ride in the west. Dust Creek lay silent. The sunset closing the story of two wounded souls, leaving a simple yet profound message. Love is sometimes not something you find, but something you learn to live with, give, and trust.
He found peace, not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving